So I had an idea for this week. I thought we'd do, because people just know us as these strikingly intelligent and handsome television characters, and somewhat unapproachable, frankly. We're a little bit aloof. There's a distance between us and our viewing public. And
Have you been drinking?
That this week, perhaps we could just give people a little peek behind the scenes, like what happens when we're planning the shows that we do for Right Angle this week. Because all they see is, that really polished, kind of slick, frankly, overproduced show known as Right Angle. And
you want to take them behind the veneer of professionalism.
Yes, I want to
and it is a veneer.
Puncture that fourth wall or the fifth estate or whatever it is. Something needs to be punctured is what I'm saying. So ladies and gentlemen, in order to do that this week, for the first time in recent memory, and that's only because my memory doesn't go back very far, we're going to have what we would call, I'm going to dub it the Backstage episode of Right Angle. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this is where we get together and first of all, cry out our pains and despair, and then we start rolling the cameras and trying to act like we're happy about what's going on in the world. And Steve, this week, you have the distinct...
Hold on. Before you go any further, I just want to tell you, it's not really related, but I just got back from the doctor, and it turns out that I have an acute allergy to the sounds ning, round, and light.
Well, I hope you've got your allergy meds, because we're doing a lightning round.
I thought you were going to say you had an allergy to the sound of my washing machine, which I think is running in the background right now.
And by the way, Bill, if you're allergic to those sounds, I just suggest you take your allergy pills and stick one in each ear.
That might work.
By the way, Steve,
before we go, I got a true tale of adventure to tell.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah, that's right. Go ahead.
So I just finished yesterday. I finished, I thought it was going to be one chapter of the Cold War. I think turns out it's going to be two. Started with Fidel Castro and ended with went through the Bay of Pigs, Berlin crisis, and then Cuban Missile Crisis. 13,222 words.
So it's two episodes because you couldn't edit it down. Is that what you're saying?
I had two episodes because there was just too much history. Yeah. I just couldn't consume that much history.
Okay.
But lost in the brouhaha on the Cuban Missile Crisis, I found a true story that just blew my mind. You guys may know that back in 1983, there was a guy who was manning a Soviet missile base, and he saw incoming U.S. warheads on his radar screen. Yep. He had orders to fire on the warning.
I think I only know this because you guys told me.
Yeah, he didn't do it, and he saved the world. He basically said, "I don't believe it," and he saved the world. Well, it turns out that the world has been saved, not joking about this now, the world has actually been saved twice, and both times was by Russians, both times in this similar situation. During the Cold War, everything was happening on the surface, and Kennedy eventually decided to put a quarantine or a blockade, if you will, around Cuba. And on the final day of the crisis, on the 27th, they finally were able to see a little daylight with a deal where Kennedy would exchange our Jupiter missiles in Turkey if Khrushchev would pull the missiles out of Cuba. So the crisis is winding down now. It's the final day of the crisis. And also deployed towards Cuba was a flotilla of 4 Foxtrot-class Soviet submarines. And one of them was B-59. And B-59 had been underwater for about the limit of its endurance, so it hadn't been up to surface for 2 or 3 days at least. It's a diesel-electric boat. And so they didn't know if the war was on or not. They suspected it probably was by the way things were going to hell before they went down. And as the B-59 is approaching, the submarine is approaching the exclusion zone, U.S. destroyer up on the surface realizes that's what they're doing and understands they may not know where the line was drawn. I mean, they may have been out of the water, underwater before they understood where the exclusion zone was. So the U.S. destroyer decides to drop some what they called test charges. And basically, these are depth charges that have the explosive force of like a hand grenade. They just go pop, and they're designed to give you an idea of how the timing on the thing works and laying out patterns and all that.
And also a way to send a warning shot across the submarine's bow instead of...
That's exactly what they did. So they get in front of B-59 and they lay down a string of these test charges. Well, As it turns out, the Soviet submarine skipper had no idea what a test charge was. He had standing orders that if fired upon, he was to return fire using the special weapon on board B-59, which was one nuclear-tipped torpedo. In order to release the torpedo, the captain had to order the launch of the torpedo, and the political officer had to agree. And the political officer enthusiastically agreed.
Of course.
But on this particular boat, on this particular day, for this particular reason, there was the guy who was also on the boat. He was second in command of B-59. And his name, I think, was Arkhipov.
This is the political officer?
No.
Okay.
This is not the political officer. This is just the executive officer. He's not in the loop. He's not part of the decision to launch the nuclear missile, the nuclear torpedo. But Arkhipov had been instrumental in helping to save K-19, the Soviet ballistic sub that had the horrible horrible radiation accident.
Yeah, the Widowmaker.
And so he was highly decorated, and he was in command of the flotilla. There were 3 other subs in addition to B-59. So he happened to be on B-59, which happened to have the commander of the flotilla there. And since he was only executive officer of the boat, he wouldn't have gotten a vote, but he did get a vote because he was in command of the flotilla. So for this one time only, and virtually unique in the annals of Soviet standard operating procedure, they actually needed 3 votes to authorize the use of the nuclear torpedo. And Arkhipov wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. They got into a screaming match and arguing and so on, and they're talking about this and that. Arkhipov had already been on K-19 when it surfaced to enormous humiliation, and somehow this guy managed to calm the captain of B-59 down. He had to surface because they were out of air. They're surrounded by U.S. Navy and subs, U.S. Navy surface ships and helicopters. They go back to Russia in disgrace. An admiral meets him at the dock and says things would have gone much better if you'd just gone down with your ship. When Arkhipov finally submits his report to the Soviet defense minister, the top guy, the defense minister starts reading this report. And when he gets to the point where he realizes that B-59 had been detected by American sonar and had depth charges dropped on it, and they had not responded with the nuclear tip missile, he got so angry that he took his glasses off, smashed them repeatedly against the desktop until they were little fragments, and stormed out of the room. But Arkhipov, I mean, look, you're at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. A nuclear tipped torpedo goes off in the middle of out in the middle of the Caribbean. I think it might have been in the Florida Straits. You don't know if it's the Americans nuking a sub. You don't know if it's a sub nuking Russian sub nuking the Americans. You don't know what it is, but you do know nuclear weapons have been used. And given how everything was on a hair trigger there, I really think that would have been several hundred million people dead if that guy hadn't been on that boat.
Damn.
Now, my only criticism of this story is that you started off by saying that the Soviets saved the world twice. This is like me claiming that I won the football game because I fumbled in the final seconds and then fell on my own fumble.
Well, what's interesting about this is those 2 instances where nuclear war was going to happen, and by all rights should have happened, really was automatically going to happen. Both times they were saved by Soviets because both times they were failures of the Soviet system. They were failures of this paranoid, super aggressive system that feared nothing worse than humiliation. So in both times, though, it's like the human spirit of these people overcame their communist ideology. And both of these guys were at serious risk of being shot for this, mind you, and their families too. But both times the humanity, just the fundamental humanity common to all people, was the final circuit breaker in this.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, you can't beat the humanity out of people, just no matter what you put them through, in a sense. I mean, you can, but by and large, I'm reading a book right now, and I can't remember the name of the author. It's a Polish guy it's called The Captive Mind. And it's talking about the mindset of people who fell under the sway of the Soviet Union and what he refers to throughout the book as the new faith, this kind of socialism/communism that was spreading after World War II. And he makes it clear throughout this book that all the people who were, in Poland anyway, who were participating in this revolution as things changed, that the vast majority of them were living a double life. Like, everybody was essentially faking it in public and privately still held on to their convictions.
Can I stop for 1 second? Because I just this second realized, 10 minutes into the show, that I don't have a topic for today. And this would be an excellent topic.
It would be an excellent topic. I want to talk
And now
about
that
this.
people have already seen the episode, that's just less time they have to waste going to see the reprise of this. Do you mind if I do that? Actually,
Yeah, and
love it.
actually, when the episode comes around, you can just speed up past the parts where Bill is talking.
That'll work perfectly. As long as we're doing sort of book or history plugs here, I'm about a third the way through. Let me get the title correct here. As you guys know, I'm a big World War I buff. And this one, it's either new or new to me. It's called A Mad Catastrophe, the Outbreak of World War I and the Collapse of the Habsburg Empire. And you know from your history that going into World War I, the Habsburg Empire, Austria-Hungary was all creaky and riven by nationalist movements and all that. This goes into the nuts and bolts of just how decrepit that country had become. What terrible condition their army was in as a result of, many things, and just how insane the Habsburgs were going to war, even against just Serbia in 1914, much less against the rest of the world. It's a really good read. It's just it's got a sprightly tone to it.
So they were so bereft of everything of value that's where we get the word hapless.
Franz Joseph's heir was originally his son Rudy, who got involved with an illicit love affair, ended up in a murder-suicide, killed himself. He was known as a reformer. He would write articles to the Viennese newspapers as a reformer, even though he's the crown prince. He got all hooked up in this thing, ended up killing himself. But if he hadn't killed himself, and he had put his reforms in place, then Franz Ferdinand would never have been crown prince because he was Joseph's nephew, Franz Joseph's nephew. And if Franz Ferdinand isn't in a car in
Sarajevo,
then I guess World War I starts someplace else.
Well, now that we're
it almost started in Morocco a year prior.
Now that we're all sharing our historical knowledge about World War I feel like I should step in here and acknowledge that World War I, for those of you who don't recall, is the one that only has one I after the word.
That's correct.
WWI.
Yeah.
That's correct.
WWI.
And it was originally known before World War II came along as the Great Big Fun War.
Yeah. Here's something for you,
known
Scotty.
by some as that, yes.
Here's something for you. Somewhere in the 30s, the witty lads at Oxford decided to have a contest to see who could write the most outrageous newspaper headline.
Oh, God.
And the winner was, this must have been about 1933 or 4. The winner was Franz Ferdinand found alive, World War I fought by mistake. Yeah. I guess it's a great war fought by mistake.
Too soon.
That's right up there with the Onion. They published a book of their newspaper covers and headlines, front pages, and they had this headline that said, "Martin Luther King Jr. I had a really weird dream last night." Okay.
It's funny how a few words will do that.
So, despite all this stalling, we haven't talked Steve out of doing a lightning round.
No, and you're not going to.
No. And I've resigned myself to our fate. So, Steve, is there anything else, or let me say it this way, is there anything of value that you'd like to contribute this week other than that?
Well, I don't know if it's of value, but it's something I'd like to talk about. So it's really the same as any other week when you think
pretty
about
much
it.
Mutually exclusive at this point. Go ahead.
Even if you don't. I want to talk about, we haven't done one of these. I think Scott did the last one a month or two ago, a little roundup of the Democratic presidential contenders. There's been quite a bit of action in the polls and with Tom Steyer and
I was going to say, do we have to put a pin at a particular moment in time so we can capture who's actually in the race right now?
Right? It's not easy.
That's kind of what it is, though, right? It is. It's a little marker in time.
Yeah. So I want to see what you guys feel for the races. And I'm not sure what to do other than that. It's just I've got a whole jumble of names and poll numbers and stuff percolating around in my skull, and I figure I'll throw some of these at you and get your reactions.
Sweet.
Percolating in my skull. So now, technically, Bill just already did his topic, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so...
Did the whole show, in fact.
So it is down to me. Okay, so
stretch this out. We're only at 15 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
It's up to you, Scott.
Don't worry, we made up for it when I decided to do kind of like a Bill Whittle tribute episode for our 300th episode of Bill Whittle Now. Actually, my idea wasn't to do a Bill Whittle tribute episode, but when Bill got done talking, that's how it came down.
That's how it came out.
Well, look, man, in my defense, I was left unsupervised.
That's right. So,
did it do 600 views?
That one, no, it's doing okay. It's not the best, as far as the most viewed episode we've ever done, but it's creeping up there. Maybe it's
creeping
because
up there's the word.
Maybe it's because I used the clickbait headline, "Don't watch this, contains virus."
All our headlines should read Anna Kournikova nude.
Yeah.
Every single one.
But what
we would be so big in 1996, it would be obscene.
But what did she nude and when did she nude it?
Important questions.
By the way, our buddy Mike over at the Bill Whittle member blog, I'm looking at this. It works on mobile devices too. If you go to billwhittle.com, and if you're a member here, you can see the blog. This is a headline, which again, I guess I have to edit this one because it's mistaken. Bill Whittle right about Trump giving farmers more than Obama. So, and the Trump and the Obama part and the farmer part, that's all correct. I have questions.
Was that Mike Satrin?
The first, it is.
That's a good friend of mine from Coeur d'Alene. Great guy.
Anyway, this is the Bill Whittle member blog is a hop in place. And these people actually even know how to put pictures in their blog posts, which is really cool. And the comments are jumping as well. So anyway, so here's my idea. I'm listening to the radio, and there's a story. I'm sorry, no. I was listening to an article. I always forget what I'm listening because I listen to podcasts. I listen to news stories that my news reader app that's called Pocket can actually read me the text news stories. And then I listen to a lot of books and podcasts. And anyway, so they're talking about recycling. And how recycling really is a waste of time these days. The Chinese won't take our stuff anymore. There's no aftermarket for all this plastic stuff, or very little aftermarket for all this plastic stuff. The sea of plastic that's flooding in new plastic products is completely overwhelming any ability to recycle it. So I heard that. And then I was reading a story about climate change. And it was a scientist who's basically saying, look, I'm sick of the activists co-opting the climate change story. And this guy's actually a guy who thinks that climate change is happening and that it's a problem. But he thinks that the left is being far too catastrophist about it and therefore ruining good science and the credibility of scientists instead of focusing on the things that really are important and things that man can have influence over. Yeah. And so as I heard that, and then there was another story on NPR, and I began to think, if you really read these stories in a particular way, you'd begin to believe that the progressives are losing every single battle that matters to them.
I have said, I think we are past peak progressivism, that's for sure.
And I don't mean that conservatives are winning.
No, that would be too much to expect.
Yeah, but I haven't really thought about that. But it's like I started thinking of even the things. Well, I think there are some things that they're literally losing. It's just not working. Like their whole campaign to get everybody to recycle everything. It doesn't really matter. Their whole campaign to get everybody all lathered up about climate change. That doesn't really matter. And then there are other things where they're actually winning, but they think they're losing, like in race relations or in the advancement of equality for women and things like that, where they're pretty darn convinced that, racial dissent and oppression is much, or division and oppression is much worse than it's ever been. And that women are getting screwed
that's a feature for them
at the job and so it's worse for everything. And meanwhile, Americans still love big trucks, fast cars, and guns.
I just had a thought. This must really annoy the hell out of them. I'm looking at Bernie Sanders at his 3 houses and everything, and I'm realizing America's so great, even our communists get rich.
That's right. They can't help themselves. In fact,
that's really great, man.
Even our communists get rich by not doing anything. Like
as communists are wont to do.
Bernie Sanders is getting wealthy by contributing nothing. Somehow he's stumbled into ridiculous wealth.
I think Bernie Sanders has got 3 houses because of his entertainment value. I mean, he's a draw.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's
Well,
like
he
if
has all
Barnum,
that
if Barnum
Seinfeld
was
money.
alive, he'd have him center stage in a cage, to be the wild man of Borneo or something, and have him in like a leopard skin loincloth. And why do you need all of these popcorns for? That kind of thing.
If Bernie Sanders didn't exist, Larry David would have to invent it.
Would have to invent him. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, I would just kind of like to talk about how it's not that progressives are losing everything, it's that progressives think they're losing everything. And what is, I mean, they are losing some things, but they think they're losing everything. And how does this
wonder
affect
they're so
you?
nasty all the time.
Yeah, like how do you wake up in the morning and go about your life being a progressive who literally thinks that in everything that matters to you is going the wrong way?
Well, having had 8 years of experience in the not too distant past, I find myself extremely familiar with this emotional state. I think they are losing everything, by the way. I don't think anything's going their way. I really don't. And I think that'd be fun to talk about.
By the way, one of the things that
this
this piece that I was reading by the guy who says that the activists shouldn't be so catastrophistic about climate change is that if they were smart, if the activists were smart, they would actually encourage developing nations, what we used to call third world nations, to burn a lot of coal. Because when you burn a lot of coal, you develop wealth in your society, and more people are lifted out of poverty, and you accelerate the rate at which you are able to afford to use other kinds of energy, which are more expensive than using coal. So if they were smart,
environmental protection is a luxury good. You've got to get rich before you can afford it. And it sounds kind of absurd, but it's absolutely true.
And it was great. We're not going to talk about this in the particular episode, but it was great because he was saying it's like if the worst case scenarios happen when it comes, for example, to crop failures due to climate change and stuff like that, they predict that that food production may drop because of this, may drop by on the order of 2 to 5% or something like that. I mean, it was something. Meanwhile, since the 30s or 40s, crop production has increased by hundreds of percent. Like we're so much better. And he said the best thing we could do for the third world is to teach them how to grow crops properly and let them use fertilizers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And insecticides.
Yeah, and occasional
things of that nature.
It would be nice.
And I think the best reason for using DDT is to make it much easier for those baby eagles to get out of their shells. Okay.
Maybe they could make like something called like DDT light or crystal DDT or something.
That's
and
right.
it would be
DDT-0.
especially used for it would we'd send the real stuff to the third world, but if you had to use them here, you could go with crystal DDT or something and guaranteed not to harm eagle eggs.
Yeah, and you'd have like a little cartoon eagle on the label with giving a thumbs up with his little claw there.
Yep.
And I know this is really dark, but I listen to too much talk radio from time to time and watch news programs on TV. And of course, the target audience for those two products is the same. And so I'm seeing the same commercials that I'm hearing basically on both of these. And I've been stunned at what a beautiful thing capitalism is, what a huge industry it is just to sue big chemical companies for things that they've made in the past. Like what would all these people do who are lawyers and who are advertising companies and who are radio station and TV station owners if they didn't have the lawsuit industry sparked by irresponsible use of chemicals in the past? It's somehow even that we turn to gold.
Peter Gruber called that a high class problem. That's a high class problem for society to have.
Yeah.
All right, let's end this goat rodeo.
Yeah, it's painful. Okay,
so we can proceed to the other goat rodeos.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, this thing happens because of our members at BillWhittle.com, as you well know, because you're one of them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this right now. And if you are, turn it off. We'll wait.
No need to lay the guilt trip on them, man.
No, they're already racked with guilt internally because they know they are worthless and they shouldn't be doing this.
And weak.
That's right, and weak. So Bill and Steve and I are able to conduct this from week to week because there are people who actually contribute financially. By the way, Bill, I will share this as a final thought. We had a member who wrote to me back in August and said that because of some setbacks financially, he was going to have to cancel his membership. And so I went in and canceled his membership, and then I wrote back to him and I said, look, we would hate to lose you over a short-term setback. And so what I've done is I've set you up with a short-term free membership. And we're just glad that we can have you around. Please stay,
You did what?
Please stay engaged in the comments and in the blog. And anyway, so yesterday I get an email from this guy who says, hey, by the way, things are picking up now. I want to reinstate my monthly membership and pay for it. And he hadn't even gone through, it's been 3-4 months. I think I had given him like a 6-month free membership or something like that. But anyway, it's that kind of caliber.
We got the best people in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Like he could have coasted along on this and kept going, well, let's wait a couple more months because I got 6 months for free.
No. The best people in the world, definitely.
It's just not how people think. And
I'm glad you didn't tell me about that because I would have woken up repeatedly during the night. Refund. Refund.
Night sweats.
Oh, yes. I said, Mr. Whittle would want you to have this. That's the kind of guy he is. He's magnanimous. Anyway,
is that how you say that word?
That's how I say that word.
All right. All right.
So thanks to folks like that guy who values this so much that even as he's going into tough times, he's thinking, man, this is like the last thing I want to cut. And the first opportunity I have to add it back, I'm going to do it. And he did.
That's sweet.
So
thank
you to the members for making this possible. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. We'll see you this week on Right Angle.